So if we're going to measure things having to do with conspiracy theories, we want to think about what is it we're going to measure. Do we want to measure a belief in a conspiracy theory? Are we, a belief that maybe someone's had for some time? Are we measuring whether they adopt a belief in the survey environment, that we give them a new belief and try and get them to buy in? Are we measuring whether the person's held on to a belief for a long time, even when that belief is, let's say, socially frowned upon, right? So to give you an example of this, when we poll on things like Holocaust denial, I mean, that's a belief that is sort of socially frowned upon. It's a taboo idea, and most people frown upon it. It's not something you bring up in public, like, hey, the Holocaust didn't happen. So unsurprisingly, people who have believed this idea for some period of time, they tend to have the sort of personality traits that allow people to hold on to beliefs even when those beliefs come with costs, right? So these people tend to be narcissistic, dogmatic, conflictual, and antisocial, right? So unsurprisingly, these are folks who can hold on to beliefs in the face of social pressures to get rid of those beliefs. Are we trying to measure the ideas themselves? Is this being communicated somewhere? Is it in content? Are we measuring the communication of the ideas? Who's tweeting it or sharing it? Or are we measuring things about the content? And those are all things we want to think about, because sometimes in the literature, all those ideas get sort of mushed together, right? Are we really talking about beliefs, or are we talking about belief adoption? Those are different things. If we go into a survey environment, what is it that we're going to try to measure? Is it a very specific belief about something, or just, do you believe in any version of a particular conspiracy theory? And this often tends to be the case. I'll give you an example with Kennedy conspiracy theories, where the typical prompt is, do you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone to kill Kennedy, or was there a broader conspiracy involved? Right. So in that case, if people believe it's a broader conspiracy, we don't really care which conspiracy. We're just trying to get to any. We might use a very different prompt if we wanted to get to a very specific, was it the CIA that did it in a particular way? Are we measuring beliefs versus a broader worldview? In the literature, there are now a few scales out there designed to measure worldviews that are prone to adopting specific conspiracy theory beliefs, right? So you could do one or the other, but essentially they're doing different things. One's measuring a worldview, another would be measuring a belief in a very specific thing. Are we trying to measure on our surveys whether they believe something or agree with something, or whether they've agreed with it for a long time, or if they hold that belief very strongly or want to act on that belief? Or are we just measuring if they've heard of it or not? Right. And again, those are all different things that we want to consider when we go to do our measurement. Same thing. Are we measuring whether people believe something, or if they just think that something is likely or plausible or potentially accurate? All different concepts. And we want to think through those things before we send our survey out. Sometimes this stuff can get particularly bad, particularly if you're looking at non-academic surveys that get a lot of traction in the news. So one thing I would warn people, whenever you see a shocking headline about belief in conspiracy theories, you need to think to yourself, the most wild surveys are going to get the most headlines written about them. But it brings up the possibility that those surveys are finding outliers, right? Because if it's extreme, it's going to be a headline, because that's what's newsworthy, right? So there's a poll that got a lot of traction a few years ago, done by a non-academic outfit that studies religious beliefs. And they put together some items that they thought measured QAnon, but none of the items say QAnon in them. And none of the items are even necessarily, or at least two of them aren't even necessarily conspiracy theories at all. So they said, oh, looks like 20+% of Americans are QAnon believers, according to this survey. But when you take other surveys, they just ask people flat out, do you believe QAnon? Are you a supporter of QAnon? You get like 5%. So those are pretty big differences between different measurements of what are supposedly the same thing.